Raising your tenant's rent can be a tricky process. It's important to keep your property up with market rates, while holding on to a great tenant is one of the best ways to ensure your property's long-term success. Sometimes it feels like these two things can counteract each other. On top of that, there have been laws introduced in recent years that directly affect how and when you can raise your tenant's rent. I'm Bryce with Good Life Property Management, and today we're going to talk about the best practices for raising your tenant's rent. Before we get started, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more awesome content like this. First, let's talk about term tenancies. If your tenant is on a term lease, like a 6-month or a 12-month lease, provide them with a minimum 30-day notice that outlines what their new rent will be and when it will go into effect. If you're increasing rent more than 10% in any 12-month period, you need to provide a minimum 90-day notice. Be sure to outline in your lease what you would like to happen once the lease expires. A lot of landlords choose to have the lease automatically turn into a month-to-month tenancy if there's no action by either party. If you do this, make sure you state the new rent and any other necessary details. For month-to-month tenancies, you're just required to provide a minimum 30-day notice if you're posting the notice at the property, or 35 days if you're only mailing the notice. We always recommend emailing your tenant a copy of the notice as well to leave a paper trail. Just like term leases, if you raise the rent more than 10% in a 12-month period, a minimum 90-day notice is required, or 95 if you're only mailing it. Deciding how much to raise the rent is often where landlords get stuck. You want to keep your good tenant, but you also want the property to make more money. Raising rents at least a small amount each year to keep pace with the market is always recommended. 2022 has been a unique year due to the significant rise in the market overall, but Good Life typically recommends a 5 to 7% increase depending on the tenancy. Look at the market rates for your area. What are comparable homes renting for and how fast are they renting? How many vacant homes are sitting on the market? You want to remain in line with or slightly below these market rates to stay competitive, even while occupied. Your tenant will be able to see these available units, and if your rent increase is significantly higher than those properties, they won't be inclined to stay. Next, review the tenancy. Keeping great tenants in your home will reduce your vacancy costs and keep your property in better condition. If you really like your tenants, you may want to do a slightly lower increase in order to incentivize them to stay. Now let's talk about laws. In recent years, a number of local and state governments have enacted new laws affecting rental properties. In 2019, the Tenant Protection Act, also more commonly known as AB 1482, was passed in California. This law limits the amount that rent can be increased each year, stating that a rent increase for a 12-month period cannot exceed 5% plus the percentage change in the cost of living over the previous year's consumer price index, and cannot exceed 10% total. Additionally, the landlord is prohibited from increasing the rental rate in more than 2 increments over a 12-month period. You are exempt from AB 1482 if any of the following apply. If your property was built within the last 15 years, if your property is a single-family home or a condo that is not owned by a corporation, real estate trust, or an LLC with a corporation member, or if your property is a duplex where the owner is occupying one of the units. It's important to note that local ordinances exist and they may be stricter than this state law. You can read more about these California laws at the link below. Alright, now let's get into our do's and don'ts when raising your tenant's rent. There's a few things that you can do to increase the odds that your tenant will accept the rent increase and renew the lease. The first tip is to give your tenant plenty of notice. While the requirement is just 30 days, generally speaking, you can notify them 45 or 60 or even 90 days in advance so that they have more time to make their decision. Another thing you can do is give them a courtesy phone call if you plan to do a large increase or haven't increased the rent on your tenants before. In fact, most of the time it's good practice to give your tenants a courtesy call that a rent increase is incoming. While you may understand that keeping up with the market rate is important, your tenants may feel blindsided or get sticker shock if their rent is going up significantly. A quick call to explain the reasoning and ask if they have any questions can go a long way. We also recommend having the increase go into effect on the first of the month to avoid confusion. Starting a rent increase in the middle of the month means you'll have to prorate the rent, which can get complicated and confusing. Lastly, it can go a long way to provide some flexibility for your tenants by providing them multiple options for the lease extension. Providing this flexibility shows that you're appreciative of them and are willing to work with them in order to get them to stay. It's a great strategy to keep great tenants in your property for a longer time and avoid a costly vacancy. On the other side of the coin, we have a few don'ts. We don't recommend waiting until the last day possible to notify tenants of a rent increase, as it can be stressful for both parties and lead to tenants being disgruntled. Another don't is raising the rent too far above rates in your neighborhood or that the market will support. Your tenants have access to all the websites that you do, like Zillow and Craigslist, and will see that they can get a better price on a comparable unit. Lastly, don't agree to negotiations by tenants that will have a negative effect on your property long term. While you should be fair to your tenants, keeping the unit significantly under the market rate will cause bigger problems in the future. You might eventually fall so far behind that you will have a big increase on your tenant, or you won't be able to catch up at all due to local restrictions. And that wraps up today's video. With these tips, you'll be able to keep great tenants in your property. I'm Bryce, and that's Olivia behind the camera. We'll see you next time.